Welcome back to the Best PT Podcast. This is episode 3.10, talking about communication impairments. The main communication impairment is aphasia. So general description, an impairment of processing for the reception and or expression of language. 95% of right-handed and 66% of left-handed people are all left hemisphere dominant for language. And remember, that's where both Broca's and Wernicke's areas are at. Two types of aphasia, fluent and non-fluent. Fluent aphasia usually occurs after lesions to the temporal lobe, Wernicke's area, or the parietal lobe. Word output and speech production are functional. Speech may lack substance, so lots of paraphasias or unintended words, phrases, or letters added to speech. Two subtypes of fluent aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia, also called receptive aphasia, is due to a lesion to the posterior superior temporal gyrus. Comprehension is impaired. Articulation is good. Writing is impaired, but there is a poor ability to produce names for things. And then conduction aphasia is due to a lesion to the supramarginal gyrus or arcuate fasciculus. Impairment with repetition. Comprehension is good. Fluency is intact, but speech is interrupted by word-finding difficulties. Reading is intact and writing is impaired. Nonfluent aphasia usually occurs after lesions to the frontal lobe of the dominant hemisphere. There is poor word output and impairments with the rhythm and inflection of speech. There is poor speech articulation and increased mental effort to produce speech. The content of speech is correct, but the syntax is not. Different types of non-fluent aphasias. Broca's aphasia, or expressive aphasia, occurs after a lesion to the third convolution of the frontal lobe. This is the most common form of aphasia. Comprehension is intact, both auditory and reading, but there is impaired repetition and naming. There is also motor impairment usually involved. Global aphasia occurs after a lesion to the frontal, temporal, or parietal lobe. Comprehension, both auditory and reading, are severely impaired. Naming, writing, and repetition are also impaired. These patients may involuntarily verbalize words without any proper context. These patients may prefer to only use nonverbal communication. Verbal apraxia occurs after a lesion to the left frontal lobe adjacent to Broca's area. This is not considered to be either aphasia or dysarthria. Verbal expression of speech is impaired due to deficits with motor planning. The patient cannot initiate learned movement, such as that involved with producing speech, even though they can comprehend language and understand the task you're asking them to do. And then finally, dysarthria is motor disorder caused by an upper motor neuron lesion, and this results in slurred speech. That's it for episode 3.10, Communication Impairments. The next episode, 3.11, we'll talk about neuromuscular pharmacology. As always, the outline will be in the show notes. Thank you for joining.